All right, let's dive into the world of PCI Express Access Control Services. We're talking ACS today. You might not know it, but it's working behind the scenes of your computer's hardware.
It's true. Most people don't realize how crucial ACS is to security and stability.
I think it's a good comparison to think of your computer's components as a city, with data constantly flowing between the different devices. And then ACS is like the security, the traffic management, and the city planning all in one. So it controls which devices can talk, what resources they can access, and how data moves throughout the system.
Yeah, it's more than just basic security, though. ACS makes sure things operate smoothly, it prevents conflicts, and safeguards the data integrity. It's really essential.
Okay, that sounds pretty important. But let's break it down. What exactly is ACS, like in simple terms?
Well, at its core, ACS is a set of rules and mechanisms. They govern how devices on a PCI Express network interact and access system resources.
So instead of it being a free-for-all, where any device can access anything, ACS kind of steps in to establish order.
Exactly. Imagine if every car on the highway could just drive wherever it wanted. It would be chaos. ACS prevents that chaos in the digital world.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. You mentioned that ACS can be implemented in both hardware and software. So how does that actually work? Is it like having physical security guards and digital checkpoints?
That's a great analogy. You have hardware-level protections. They're built into the devices, like physical barriers that prevent unauthorized access. And then you also have software-based controls. Those are managed by the system's firmware or operating system. And those act as the digital checkpoints. They verify the permissions and enforce the rules.
So it's multiple levels of protection. I'm still curious, though, about what ACS actually does to prevent those security issues. Can you give me some specific examples?
One of the key functions of ACS is preventing unauthorized peer-to-peer transactions. In some systems, devices are actually designed to communicate directly with each other. They don't have to go through the main controller.
Hold on, isn't that a good thing? Like, doesn't that make things faster? Why would you want to prevent that?
Well, direct communication can boost performance in some cases. But it also creates a potential backdoor for attackers. Imagine a malicious device, like a compromised USB drive, uses this direct communication channel to bypass security checks and steal data.
Okay, I see the problem. So ACS steps in and says, nope, all communication has to go through the proper channels where we can scrutinize it.
Exactly. It forces transactions to stick to the rules and prevents those sneaky backdoor deals.
So is that related to silent data corruption? Is that a result of these unauthorized transactions?
That's one possible cause, yeah. Silent data corruption happens when data is altered or damaged, but without any obvious errors or warnings. It can be the result of various factors, including hardware faults, software bugs, or even intentional manipulation from attackers.
So in the case of these transactions that aren't authorized, you wouldn't even know that the data was being stolen or manipulated because it's happening under the radar.
Exactly, that's what makes it so insidious. ACS helps prevent this by ensuring that all data flows through designated pathways, making it much harder for attackers to slip in unnoticed and tamper with things.
So what about the IOMU, the component that translates memory addresses? Does ACS have a role in protecting that?
You're thinking along the right lines. Remember ATS, or Address Translation Services. It allows devices to bypass the IOMU, which can sometimes be a good thing for performance.
Right. But you also said it could be a security risk.
Right, and that's where ACS steps in. It can disable ATS for specific devices, or enforce stricter rules to control how it's used.
So ACS is like a bouncer, but for the computer's memory.
Precisely. Maintaining order and ensuring everything stays where it should.
Okay, I see just how important ACS is for security, but how does that actually play out? Does it just block everything that seems suspicious?
It's a little more nuanced than that. ACS relies on a concept called egress vectors. They define the allowed paths for data packets within the system.
Oh, so it's like designated routes for different types of traffic?
That's exactly it. By controlling the egress vectors, ACS can prevent data from being misdirected or intercepted, even if an attacker manages to compromise a device.
Okay, so it's not just blocking, it's more like directing. I'm starting to see the bigger picture. ACS isn't just a simple firewall or security measure. It's an entire system for controlling data flow and access.
You got it. And that's what makes it so effective.
This is fascinating, but also a bit overwhelming. If someone was building a system, what are the key things to think about when it comes to ACS?
That's a great question. First and foremost, they need to make sure their hardware supports ACS. Not all devices are created equal.
So you can't just assume every component will work with ACS.
Exactly. You need to do your research and check the specs.
What about the software side?
That's equally important.
Hmm.
Your firmware and operating system need to be able to configure and manage ACS. It's not just the hardware, it's also the software.
So it's not just plug and play. There's setup involved. What else?
A crucial aspect is establishing security policies. You define what level of access each device gets, what resources they can interact with, and what types of transactions are permitted.
So you're saying turning on ACS isn't enough?
Absolutely. It's about tailoring ACS to your specific system and needs. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
That makes sense. Any other tips?
Yes. They need to consider the potential performance impact of ACS. While it's great for security, it can sometimes add overhead to data transactions. It's about finding the right balance.
So you might need to sacrifice some security for performance. Or the other way around.
Yeah, you have to carefully weigh the risks and benefits.
Yeah.
And finally, you need to make sure that ACS plays nicely with other PCI Express features. You don't want compatibility conflicts.
So it needs to be a team player.
Exactly. It needs to integrate seamlessly.
This has been really insightful. ACS acts as a multi-talented guardian for PCI Express systems. It's not just a simple on-off switch, it's a complex system that needs to be carefully considered.
Yeah, and as we move into more complex computing environments, like virtualization, ACS becomes even more important.
That's a perfect segue into the next part of our deep dive. We'll be exploring how ACS plays a role in securing virtualized environments and ensuring that everything runs smoothly.
It's a topic that gets even more interesting as we delve deeper.
Stay tuned, because there's much more to uncover.
Welcome back to our deep dive on access control surfaces.
It's really interesting to see how much we rely on this stuff even without realizing it.
Yeah, exactly. And as we discussed earlier, ACS is all about managing access and permissions, making sure the right data is going to the right place at the right time.
Yeah, it's like a security guard and a traffic cop and a city planner all rolled into one.
That's a good way to put it. Today we're going to explore some more specific ways that ACS keeps our systems safe, especially when it comes to virtualization.
Okay, great. One thing I've been wondering about is how ACS protects against those silent data corruption situations you mentioned.
Yes, silent data corruption. It's a tricky problem where data gets altered or damaged, but without any obvious signs or errors.
Like a thief stealing bits and bytes without leaving a trace. Why is that such a big deal?
Exactly. Can have some really serious consequences, especially in applications where data integrity is super important.
Like financial transactions, or medical records, or even a tiny change could be a huge deal.
Exactly. Imagine your bank balance suddenly changing, or your medical history getting messed up without anyone knowing how it happened.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty scary. So how does ACS actually prevent this? Is it just about controlling those peer-to-peer transactions?
Well, that's part of it, but it's more than that. ACS makes sure that packets are routed correctly within the system. Each packet of data has a specific destination address.
Like an envelope with a mailing address.
Exactly. And ACS controls which devices can talk to each other, making sure those packets are delivered to the correct address.
So it's like preventing mix-ups and misdeliveries?
That's right. Make sure that each packet reaches its destination without taking any detours or getting mixed up, and this helps prevent data from being corrupted, either accidentally or intentionally.
That makes sense. But data corruption isn't always an accident, is it? What about someone actively trying to mess with the data?
Right. Well, that's where ACS Managing Address Translation Services comes in, or ATS.
Yeah. It's like the bouncer for the computer's memory.
Exactly. And this is super important for preventing attacks that exploit ATS.
So even if an attacker tries to bypass the IOMMU using ATS.
Yeah. ACS is there to help. It ensures that the security stays intact, protecting the memory.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine an attacker gets control of a USB drive. They could try to use APS to access memory regions that they shouldn't be able to.
So they're trying to sneak past the bouncer.
Exactly. But ACS can disable ATS for that device or enforce really strict rules,
Yeah.
preventing the attacker from reaching those areas.
So ACS is kind of like a safety net.
Precisely. It adds a layer of defense, even if there's a vulnerability somewhere else.
Yep. This is really interesting. It's not just about blocking access. It's about controlling how data moves and who can access it.
That's it. And the best part is that ACS can be customized for different security needs.
Speaking of different needs, I'm curious about how this works with virtualization. It seems like things would get really complicated with multiple virtual machines on one physical machine.
You're right. Virtualization does add more complexity. Imagine multiple guests sharing a house. each with their own things.
You don't want those guests messing with each other's stuff.
Exactly. And that's where ACS comes in, and make sure each virtual machine has its own resources and can't access things that belong to other virtual machines.
So it's creating boundaries.
Yeah. It helps to keep the whole virtual environment stable and secure.
But doesn't this all slow things down with all these checks and controls?
Well, modern ACS implementations are designed to be efficient.
So they've managed to make it work without sacrificing too much performance.
Right. The benefits of the security usually outweigh the small performance costs.
So it's all about finding the right balance.
Yeah. That's where knowing your specific needs is really important.
This has been so insightful. I'm starting to see ACS as a really important part of modern computing.
Absolutely. It's the unsung hero working behind the scenes.
Okay, before we finish up this part, I want to go back to data integrity. You said that ACS helps prevent data corruption. Can you say more about that?
Sure. Data integrity means that data stays accurate and unchanged. We use data for so many things, like financial transactions and medical diagnoses. It needs to be reliable.
Yes, definitely. So how does ACS fit into that?
It prevents unauthorized changes and ensures that information flows correctly by controlling access and transmission. ACS helps protect data from being corrupted, both accidentally and maliciously.
So it's protecting our data from being lost or damaged or manipulated?
Exactly. It helps guarantee that the data we use is trustworthy.
Okay, I think I'm really getting it now. ACS is super important for keeping our digital world running smoothly and securely.
I agree. It's the silent guardian, always working to protect our data and systems.
And as technology keeps changing, I bet ACS will become even more important.
For sure. It's an area that's constantly developing. And in the last part of our deep dive, we'll talk about some of the emerging trends and challenges for ACS.
Looking forward to it. Stay tuned, everyone. We're about to talk about the future of ACS. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into access control services.
We've talked about a lot, from the basics of ACS to how it secures virtualized environments.
It really is amazing to think about all this complexity happening behind the scenes, keeping everything working.
Yeah, but like any technology, ACS has to keep changing to keep up with new challenges.
Okay, so for this last part, let's look to the future. What are some of the things on the horizon for ACS?
Well, one of the biggest trends is how complex computer systems are becoming. We have way more devices and connections and data than ever before.
And ACS has to manage all of that.
Exactly. And it has to do it without sacrificing security or performance.
So it's a tough balancing act.
For sure. And it's not just about the amount of data and devices. The threats are also getting worse.
You mean like hackers are getting better?
Exactly. They're always finding new ways to take advantage of vulnerabilities. ACS needs to stay ahead of them.
So what's being done to address that?
One really interesting area is the use of machine learning and AI in ACS.
So ACS is getting smarter.
Yeah. Machine learning can help ACS analyze patterns and spot anomalies. It can even predict attacks.
Wow. That's like a super smart security guard.
It is. Machine learning can make ACS much faster and more effective.
That's great to hear. Anything else?
Another important trend is integrating ACS with other security technologies.
So it's about working together with other security measures?
Exactly. For example, ACS can work with encryption or authentication systems. It creates a much stronger defense.
It's like a fortress with multiple walls.
It's a great way to put it. It's a more holistic approach.
Okay, this all sounds amazing, but are there any downsides to these advancements?
That's a good question. One concern is that these more advanced ACS systems are becoming more difficult to manage.
So as it gets more powerful, it also gets more complicated.
Unfortunately, yes. It takes a lot of expertise to implement and manage ACS properly.
So you can't just set it and forget it.
Right. And that leads to another potential issue, which is relying too much on ACS.
What do you mean?
ACS is really important, but it's not a magic solution. It's just one piece of the puzzle.
So we still need other security measures.
Yes. Things like firewalls and strong passwords are still critical.
So it's about having a comprehensive approach.
Exactly.
Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive, what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
I think the main takeaway is that ACS will only become more important in the future. It's a crucial part of modern computing.
Even if most people don't even know it exists.
That's true. But as ACS changes, we need to stay informed about what it can do and what its limits are.
And how to use it safely and effectively.
Exactly.
Well said. I think that's a great note to end on. ACS has a bright future, but we need to make sure we're using it wisely to protect our systems and data.
I agree.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the world of access control services. It's been a pleasure.
And we hope you'll join us again for our next deep dive, where we'll explore another fascinating topic in the world of technology. Until then, keep exploring and stay curious.